Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. If you didn't hear the big news, we got a big storm coming our way this weekend. There's much more about it. John Giorsi's predictions for the weekend and the latest update from AccuWeather are all on GoLocal, so take a look at that. But let's go down to the University of Virginia. Jennifer Lawless, the chair of the Political Science Department down there. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to join you.
And not much is going on in politics these days, but I know we'll talk a lot about Washington, the Biden administration, the Supreme Court, and much, much more. But let's start up here with a congressional race. Jim Langevin announces that he's not running for re-election. He's been there a long, long time. You know him well. You ran against him. Let's start with Jim Langevin and your experience with running against him.
Well, it's hard to take on an incumbent, so all of the candidates this cycle are going to have a better shot simply because it's an open race. But what I will say is that this is a very competitive and crowded primary, so the primary is likely going to be where all of the competition is. And given that there are so few electoral opportunities in Rhode Island to go to Washington, anybody with any degree of political ambition has to seriously be thinking about throwing their hat into the ring.
Okay, so let's talk about who's in. Omar Ba is a very interesting man, a refugee from Africa, was a journalist there, was tortured there, has come over here and created a number of pathways for refugees to come to the United States and to Rhode Island specifically. Widely respected and a wildly interesting man. We've had him on GoLocal Live, I think, a few times. That's one candidate. Seth Magaziner, who was running for governor, quit the governor's race formally yesterday, announced he's running for Congress. Alan Fung on the Republican side is making noise, calling contributors, calling supporters as well. There's a lot going on. Expect many more Democrats to formally jump into the race. Your thoughts about a Democrat, potentially a moderate Republican? How does all this work out?
So I don't see a path for a Republican to hold that seat for a couple of reasons. The first is that this is one of these times where the control of the House of Representatives is really on the line. And in order for Rhode Island's congressional delegation to get anything done, in order for Democrats to get anything done, Democrats have to hold on to the seats that they currently have. And so there will be national pressure, and there will also be interest among voters in Rhode Island to make sure that they still send a Democrat to Washington. The second thing is, if you look at some of these candidates, a candidate like Seth Magaziner is pretty appealing at the federal level when you think about what it takes to run. Most congressional races now are multi-million-dollar contests with a national fundraising base. And whether Magaziner himself has that base, he certainly has connections to that base. And so my bet is that he is unusually well situated among those who are thinking about running or who have already announced to raise $1 million very, very quickly, and as a result, to garner early national endorsements and early support. So it's not a guarantee that he's going to win, and I think that there are several other candidates that would be appealing. If Josh Miller decides to run, for example, he has a well-respected base in Cranston. He has an excellent record as a progressive state legislator. But at this point, I would say that it's probably, on a lot of these metrics, Magaziner's race to lose.
Let's talk about a little bit. You know, one X factor, and we talked about it over the weekend, you were quoted in a piece, you know, here's the Democratic Party in having never sent a woman or a minority to Washington, D.C. in one of the bluest states in the country. Here's that opportunity. It's a different time and place. People are demanding change. Another proverbial white guy going and filling the seat. Your thoughts on the pressure there will be on the Democratic Party here in Rhode Island to make some change happen?
Well, I don't think that there is going to be a lot of pressure. First of all, the most important thing is going to be holding on to that seat. And so if there's a candidate that the national party doesn't need to exert a lot of resources on, that person is going to immediately have a leg up. The second thing is, and this is amazing to me, because when I ran for Congress in 2006, I made a very strong case that we needed a woman in our congressional delegation. There had never been a female governor. There had only been one woman to ever serve in the congressional delegation. Rhode Island at the time, I think, ranked something like 38th nationally in terms of the percentage of women in the state legislature. You fast forward 15 years and you've had a woman governor, you have a female lieutenant governor. Rhode Island now ranks third nationally in the percentage of women in the state legislature. So that outcry, that need to ensure that women are part of Rhode Island politics, in some ways has been addressed, which means that the pressure for any one seat to be held by a woman, I think, decreases a little bit.
Yeah, but that's a little different from being in the state legislature and being in the United States Congress. Let me switch over to the Alan Fung plea. Alan Fung can say, listen, if he can define himself about Trumpism and things like that, but let's say he can. He goes moderate Republican, Ron Makeley, John Chafee style, and he says, listen, Rhode Island loses big time if we never have somebody in the Congress. We're going to be in the minority again. We're going to be out of power. The House is overwhelmingly likely to flip to being Republican. I'm your chance to still have a voice in what's going on in the House of Representatives versus a guy who's going to be, or a woman who's going to be a freshman in the minority.
Two thoughts, and let me preface this by saying that on a personal level, I really like Alan Fung. The first is he's demonstrated that he'll go whichever way the wind blows. When we saw him run for governor, and we saw him ultimately embrace Trump when it meant potentially winning. So I don't have that much confidence that even if he were a moderate Republican and he got elected, he would remain a moderate Republican in Congress. Second thing I would say is there's no place for moderate Republicans in Congress, and we've seen this. I don't think that a moderate Republican would have a voice if the Republican Party wins the majority, unless he would be pivotal. And I just don't see that happening. So in some ways, I think Democrats could make the case that a nominee like Alan Fung is actually the worst thing that the state would get in terms of representation, because he'd be not a Democrat, which means that the majority of Rhode Island voters wouldn't be in sync with him, but he also wouldn't be embracing the Republican Party as it's currently conceived in Washington.
Okay, let's jump over to the Supreme Court. Blockbuster yesterday, Pete Williams at NBC breaks the story that Supreme Court Justice is stepping down. This is a big shakeup. During the campaign, Joe Biden promised, if elected president, he would nominate at the first vacancy a black woman, explicitly he said that, to be in the Supreme Court. Is there any chance he does not name a black woman to fill this vacancy?
No chance.
Okay, so he names it. Can he hold the Democratic Senate majority together to be able to get that nominee through?
I was looking, he's had an incredible success rate at getting his judicial nominees through, and people like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have not generated any trouble for him when it comes to these nominees. Now, this will be a higher profile nominee, and so I don't think that they will be silent, but it's hard to imagine a scenario by which they keep him from being able to nominate somebody to the court, given the history that they've been willing to put forward, vote in favor of his nominees. The other thing that I would say that's really important here is that there have also been a handful of Republicans that have generally supported most of his nominees as well. So this will be an opportunity to see, and it will depend on who he nominates, but have we reached the point in time where on a high-profile case, even if Republicans have supported these people for other positions, they will no longer say yes, and we're going to wind up with a 51-50 vote just simply because those are the times.
And how quickly, he needs to move quickly. He can't dilly-dally around on this like he has seemed to have done on many legislative initiatives. How quickly is he going to put forth a name?
Oh, my bet is very, very quickly. Breyer's going to announce today that he's formally retiring. I would imagine that the White House for the last year has been cultivating this short list. I wouldn't be surprised if we had a name within a week.
And any prediction on who is it? D.C. Court of Appeals or California Supreme Court?
Probably D.C.
D.C. All right. Let's talk about, I think I remember the president functionally saying that Build Back Better as we know it is dead. There's tweets, it seems like every day, from Gina Raimondo at Commerce Department. I'm not sure she saw the press conference or has been tuned in. She literally has a tweet today saying Build Back Better is critical for the future of our country, et cetera, et cetera. The bill is dead. DOA.
The bill is dead. I think that some Democrats are still using Build Back Better as a shorthand for the Biden social spending agenda, but it's impossible to envision a scenario whereby Build Back Better is resurrected in the form that we're all familiar with. So, there might be a very, very slimmed down version of this, but it's a totally different bill.
He's had so many difficult legislative defeats, Build Back Better being really the most high profile in the last 30 days or so. He had a major press conference, and I thought the press being critical of him for the most part was unfair. I thought it was a remarkable press conference, 2 straight hours, answered everybody's questions, regardless from what press organization they were from. He may have misstepped a little on the Ukraine, which we'll get to in a minute, but the rest of it was pretty rock solid. What's his reset to be able to jumpstart? Now we're through January again. Another month is gone. When is this reset going to really become apparent to all of us and to the American people?
Well, I think this Supreme Court appointment is the beginning of it, because the timing of it also allows the president to signal to people of color that he actually is doing everything he possibly can to advocate for their interests. He wasn't able to get voting rights through the way that he wanted. He has faced obstacles in the Senate regarding various spending bills that would disproportionately help people of color. This is a clear case where he can say, look, I made a promise to you. This one is all on me. I'm able to do this, and I'm doing it. So I think that that's the beginning of a series of wins, and that level of confidence will, I think, beget additional wins.
On the foreign policy side, Afghanistan's exit was not a thing of beauty. Much criticism of how it was handled, how it was pre-planned, the fact that many Afghans who had served with American troops and protected American troops and fought right along or were translators are still not out of that country. Now Ukraine comes along. Here's a fellow superpower in Russia. The level of tension is reaching a very, very high level. Talk about what Biden's options are for the Ukraine and what you think will be his move.
Well, I think he and Secretary Blinken have made it very clear that the minute one Russian troop sets foot in Ukraine, there's going to be a swift response. The fact that Putin is sort of considering the written responses to the questions that he had laid out the other day suggests that he's not going to move quickly, or I shouldn't say quickly, haphazardly. I think both sides have it in their best interest to not escalate very quickly. But I don't know. I feel like the geopolitical climate right now is far more precarious than it's been since the fall of the Soviet Union. And that includes the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The fact that Germany is so dependent on Russia, for heat, is also making things a little bit more complicated. But it seems to me that the Ukraine liked the U.S. response. NATO seems to be on board with the U.S. response, and the U.S. is not going to respond alone. But generally speaking, I find the whole thing a little bit worrisome. And I remember the late 80s where this was a time, I was in elementary school, and I remember, we had bomb drills and we had nuclear weapon drills. What do you do? And this is the first time that I felt that kind of fear since then.
China swiped back at the United States yesterday, today, depending on where you live in the world, I think, and is not voicing strong displeasure with the United States. I think some of it is over Taiwan, some of it's over the Olympics, but clearly stating that they have a strong displeasure for the Biden administration. Can we battle on 2 fronts, and is this just saber rattling by the Chinese, or is this the beginning of their creating more tension in order to make a move on Taiwan?
I don't know. I do think that the timing of it suggests that they're aware of the fact that maybe we can't walk and chew gum at the same time as well as we would all like to. And this is a good opportunity for them to begin to make it clear what their plans are. And the United States obviously has to stay focused right now on Ukraine and Russia. My hunch is that it's probably, I don't think that we're like at the precipice of something terrible happening, but I mean, the fact that on multiple fronts, there is this uncertainty. And this is a president who was elected in large part because he could bring back calm to the world stage, doesn't bode particularly well.
Economically, the Biden administration, I would think, is at the fax machine sending out press releases on GDP. I think they still use the old fax machines with the curled up paper and all that sort of
So they're
stuff.
still mimeographing.
They've got ink all over their hands. It's quite embarrassing. But let's say they're getting the message out to the American people. A big GDP number released today for the fourth quarter in the United States. But GDP versus inflation, I'm not sure when I go to the grocery store, I see any implications of a good GDP versus a bad GDP. I do know when I go to the grocery store that bacon costs a lot more, and that's quite objectionable to me.
And in addition to that, you'll also notice, I don't go to the grocery store anymore, but I hear that, the shelves don't have as much on them. Basically, I think the Biden administration is stuck here because the GDP numbers are excellent, and in any other political and economic climate, they would be a resounding success and probably a path to re-election. That's not the case, obviously, because inflation is here, and at least it's here to stay for the medium term. The problem with not passing Build Back Better is that although that wouldn't have addressed explicit inflation in terms of like bacon, it would have reduced the costs for a lot of families in terms of what they would pay for childcare, what they would pay for elder care or health care. So now that's not on the table, which means that Americans are being hit with higher prices across the board on all sorts of goods and services at the same time that the economy is growing. And so as a result, they don't really feel the growth. And that's just really difficult because if you tout these GDP numbers, if you tout high employment numbers, it sort of flies in the face of what the average person is experiencing on a daily basis. And not only does it not resonate, but it sort of makes the administration look out of touch. And that's a really difficult place to navigate in terms of a communications perspective.
Listen, it couldn't be better times going into the midterm for the Republicans. And let me just recap some of the things that just look unstable. The stock market's had as wild a ride, an alarming level of ups and downs in the past few days. You've got police officers around the country being shot. I think a total of 5 were killed just over the weekend. You've got Ukraine and China. You've got all these things that look like things are out of control. How does Joe Biden recover and look like I'm in charge, we've got a course, we're moving forward on it, and sort of everything's going to be okay?
Well, first, I think he has to do a lot more of what he did at that press conference. My read of it was similar to yours. I think he demonstrated a degree of stamina and competence. Not every answer was perfect, and it went on for a very long time. But I think it was difficult to walk away from that press conference thinking that the administration doesn't have a grasp of what's going on or a plan to handle it. I think he needs to communicate way more often with the American people. The second thing is, a lot of the discussion right now about how well the Republicans are situated to take back control of Washington is based on a sort of generic Republican. And if anything, we've learned over the course of the last several election cycles that some of the Republicans who win their primaries and become nominees are far from mainstream people that the average American would want to send to Congress. And so some of this message is not a national message. Some of it is about ensuring that Democratic candidates in these congressional districts are able to expose a lot of these Republicans for what they actually are.
And does that mean the Republicans aren't going to take the House?
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I mean, I should note right off the bat that my political predictions are horrendous and I'm almost always wrong. But I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion, again, because of the idiosyncratic nature of some of these districts and particularly some of these candidates. You know, Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, who were able to win in their districts, would not have a chance in a purple district. And when you look at where the Republicans have to win in order to pick up the majority, a lot of these are solid purple districts where you could argue that Democrats barely eked out a victory, but it's hard to make the case that a Republican that looks like a Republican in a really, really red district would have a chance either.
What should people be looking forward to over the next week? Will we see Biden name a nominee? What else should we be looking at?
So obviously, I think the Supreme Court is very important, and the Ukraine I would put up there. What's going on in Ukraine is particularly important as well. And the manner in which the administration communicates to the American people what's going on in Ukraine. Is there going to be a primetime address? Is there going to be a press conference where the nuances of what this means for our relationship with NATO, for our relationship with Putin? This is one of those times where I feel like the American people probably need a president to quell their concerns and let them know that everything's going to be okay.
Professor Jennifer Lawless, Chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia, as always, thank you very much for your insights, the rare view of both national and, of course, your experience here in Rhode Island in the past. Thank you so much. For everybody else, stay tuned. There is a lot going on. We'll have a very interesting guest, a movie maker out of Rhode Island who is hitting the big time. He'll be joining us, Mr. Perez will be joining us at 1 o'clock. For everybody else, stay safe. If you haven't gotten boosted, do it, please, for yourself. Stay out of Rhode Island Hospital. It does not sound like a good experience these days. Thanks, everybody.